I've taken it as my duty, it's too strong to say life's work, to point out that it is not in the best interests of lefties to basically support people who don't back our policies. And there's some situations where you compromise, there's other situations where you have to win outright. But there are times where when you realize that there is no way for you to move forward, that you have to stop what you're doing, reevaluate. And then the reevaluation after 40 years, lefties at this point, especially after 2020, need to come to Jesus and realize that what you want from a policy standpoint is not going to be accomplished through the Democratic Party. It is not that I want Trump to win. By the same token, I don't want Joe Biden to win either. And if I'm looking at this entirely from the standpoint of just policy, how do I get my policy agenda accomplished? I don't think it can be done in the Democratic Party. It can only be done if a large number of people, millions, extricate themselves from the party and stand under this idea of policy. These are the policies that we want, accept it or not. If the Democratic Party is so obtuse that they are willing to lose to Trump as opposed to accepting a policy that is popular to the tune of 69%, that loss is entirely and completely on them. Somebody needs to explain to me why losing to Trump as opposed to accepting concessions is a legitimate position. The Cedars of the world need to explain that. This has nothing to do with people who are not voting for the Democratic Party. This has everything to do with the Democratic Party not being willing to go after those people's votes by accepting reasonable, preferred policy. Let's hear Khanna make this BS argument about Joe Biden being a bridge to a progressive future.
In case you don't know, pointing out, in case you don't know in the audience, Congressman Khanna was co-chair of the Bernie Sanders for President campaign. That's correct?
Yes. Still proud of it.
So how enthusiastic or unenthusiastic are you about Joe Biden?
I'm enthusiastic of making sure that we defeat Donald Trump and that we elect Vice President Biden. I was in the Obama administration. I served there for 2 years. He did a remarkable job during the recovery and led some of those efforts. But here's what I say to Bernie supporters. I said, look, I don't sugarcoat it. I don't think Joe Biden is going to lead us into the next progressive era. I think he's going to be a bridge. But if here's the choice. You could either have Donald Trump, who's going to stack the Supreme Court in a way that I don't care who the president is, Medicare for all, and a living wage and other policies we want about bargaining rights. The courts aren't going to allow it.
That's not really true.
Or you could get
Medicare has already been shown itself to be legal. Expanding something that is already shown to be legal will continue to be legal. That's, of course, not an absolute, but in the case of Medicare, it is. Medicare for all would have been far easier to get through some level of Supreme Court scrutiny as opposed to the current Obamacare. He is right, however, that the Supreme Court will have members or people put on during the Trump administration for a second term. However, any lefty that's going to get in office would have to be able to mitigate that. And one of the ways to mitigate that is basically either rotating those Supreme Court justices out or packing the court. Meaning it's not necessarily entirely intractable for somebody to get in office after the fact and be able to try to mitigate the damage of the Supreme Court in regards to getting your policy agenda accomplished. They need to extricate themselves from the party and stand outside in order to pressure and to organize themselves into somewhat of a collective that will happen just by virtue of them pressuring and being under the policy guidelines of being under those policies. I don't care what your political affiliation is, Democrat, socialist, somewhere in between. Even if you think the policies don't go far enough, even if you think the policies are too far to the right. If you agree with them, if you agree with most of them, standing under that umbrella gives you the best opportunity to try to pressure the political system as opposed to folding yourself in the Democratic Party where you give over all your support for nothing. Let's hear the rest of what Khanna is saying. I'm just making the point that Khanna, the notion that Joe Biden is going to be a bridge to a progressive future is I would argue lunacy. And I got to be honest, I don't even entirely know what that means.
Week that caught my eye about the former vice president. It was in Politico, done in consultation with the Morning Consult polling group, which has a fine reputation. And that poll said that 28% of Democrats who intend to vote in the 2020 election, quote, definitely, unquote, or quote, probably, unquote. So the two are definitely and probably. 28% of Democrats surveyed favor replacing Joe Biden with another nominee. Your reaction?
Well, look, I think the history of our party is we always are second guessing ourselves. And I wonder what that number was when Bill Clinton in 92. And I remember with Obama, people were saying, oh, can he win? He's got a Muslim middle name. That's just the nature of Democrats. But absent something incredibly dramatic, Joe Biden will be our nominee. And having someone else come last minute who hasn't gone through the democratic process, I don't think that's healthy, and that would generate a lot of concern. I think we have someone who's after 25 candidates. And look, I fought very hard. There are tapes of me saying not great things about Joe Biden. But the point is we litigated it and he won.
While we don't know the exact number of people who might have wanted Obama replaced or who might have wanted Bill Clinton replaced or Hillary Clinton replaced, we do know enthusiasm. Now, this polling showing Joe Biden's level of enthusiasm in the race in comparison to other candidates. Right here. For Donald Trump, 53% are very enthusiastic, 32% are somewhat enthusiastic, 14% not at all. For Joe Biden, 24% are very enthusiastic. You heard that right, 24%. That's less than half of Trump's number for enthusiasm. Those people are going to be out in the polling. Now, the coronavirus is the X factor in this, so take that with a grain of salt. But the people who are backing Trump are enthusiastic to back Trump. Here's the other point. There's deja vu in these results. Former Secretary Hillary Clinton found herself in a largely same position 4 years ago. She, too, had a slim lead among Democrats for the nomination and ran essentially evenly with Trump registered voters. She lagged in enthusiasm with a low 32% very enthusiastic in September 2016. Biden is 8 points under Clinton. Again, is a poor omen. The notion that this guy's going to bring in a progressive future is mind-blowing to me. The other part to that, he mentioned, let me see, enthusiasm. He also mentioned Obama. And, the case was litigated, that this election was litigated, and there are pictures or videos of him saying bad things about Biden. It's not about what he says about Joe Biden. I hope you understand that. The surrogates can say some of anything. At the end of the day, it boils down to what the candidate himself is willing to say in the case that the candidate himself is willing to prosecute. And I'm sorry, Bernie Sanders didn't prosecute a case against Joe Biden. For example, this. Nina Turner made the argument, and I'm just going to show one to make my point. Nina Turner basically made the argument that Joe Biden wasn't a friend to black people. And she did that in an editorial. Now, I got to be honest, this was the most soft attack on Joe Biden. And she, if I'm not mistaken, talked more about like Social Security, Medicare, these things where Joe Biden was willing to cut these things. And that African Americans, in large part, used and was dependent upon these things. When Bernie Sanders was asked this on the debate stage,
several weeks ago, Nina Turner, one of your national co-chairs, published an op-ed piece that said Vice President Biden has, quote, repeatedly betrayed black voters to side with Republican lawmakers and undermine our progress. Senator Sanders, do you agree with her, one of your most visible surrogates, that Vice President Biden has repeatedly betrayed black voters?
Well, I think what Senator Turner was talking about are some of the early actions of Vice President Biden. But no, Joe Biden is a friend of mine.
Joe Biden is a friend of mine. Joe Biden never betrayed. I think he betrayed black voters early on, but nothing recently. He was perfectly okay recently. The cuts to Social Security and Medicare, those betrayed black voters. The crime bill, those betrayed black voters. They had a disparity between crack and cocaine that they absolutely knew about that sent more African Americans to prison for longer jail sentences. This while having a crackhead son who, instead of taking a longer jail sentence, ends up getting a stripper pregnant and is making $80,000 a month working at a company where he has zero experience. Also, you can make the case, this case, right here.
When I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We have the 8th largest black population in America. Most people don't know that. And I'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, then I'd go to Reverend Herring's church where we'd meet in order to organize and figure where we were going to go, whether we were going to desegregate the Rialto movie theater or what we were going to do. I got my education for real in the black church. And that's not hyperbole, it's a fact. But
did Joe Biden really get his education for real in the black church? Joe Biden was busted in the 80s with this very particular point of lying about the civil rights movement. You don't believe me? Listen to him in his own words.
During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else.
When Bernie Sanders is on the debate stage and is asked that very specific question, Bernie Sanders needs a black vote, Bernie Sanders needs an elderly vote, Bernie Sanders needs to win this argument of electability. At no point did Bernie Sanders make this argument that Hillary Clinton lost, John Kerry lost, Al Gore lost, and Joe Biden is just basically the next iteration of those exact same people. Not making the argument that the radical in the race was Obama, and Obama ends up winning that race, and the person who has the best chance in regards to electability is himself. He can never make that argument. And even though he needed the black vote desperately, and his campaign was actually tanked by the black vote, he could never make the basic point that Joe Biden was lying about civil rights, despite the fact that he was the one that marched with King. Don't tell me, Roe, that this was litigated. This was not litigated. The person who was supposed to go to war never even loaded his weapon. So I don't want to hear about this being litigated. I don't want to hear about, the Supreme Court, when the DNC or the Democratic Party was perfectly willing to give this over to the Republican Party if it meant stopping us. I don't want to hear about any of that. These guys are now shucking and jiving to get as many people as possible into the Democratic Party. And again, the reason why I make these videos is because I try to point out that it is not in our best interest to function and give over our support to a party that in no way represents our party or political interests. Like, share, subscribe.